When Mark told his parents about his past life on Mars, they thought he was just making things up and just got along with his imagination. His parents found it cute and amusing, but they never really took it seriously. His vivid descriptions of the Martian landscape and the creatures he encountered there were so detailed that it was hard to believe he was just making it up. His parents would often just smile and nod, not wanting to discourage his creativity. They were amazed at how his imagination could take him to such faraway places, but they never really believed it was real. But when Mark received his own computer for his birthday, things took weird turns. One day, two strange men stood at his door. "Are you Mark? We want to speak with you, kid," one said. Mark answered, "I have a message." Mark was so confident about his past life as the boy on Mars. The two strange men couldn't believe what they were hearing. This little boy, answering the door himself, was so confident about what he knew and what they apparently didn't. He told them he had been a boy on Mars and that he had been sent to Earth to save the planet. He said he had been sent to find the key to save the planet. The two men were so intrigued by this story that they decided to let him continue with his story. A little boy couldn't come up with such details if it was just fantasy. The men saw that this boy had a very important role to play in the bigger scheme of things. They had to make sure that Mark was given the best resources and experts to help him further his understanding and research. And as the two men and Mark's parents stared at him, all of them understood that Mark was no normal kid. He clearly wasn't destined to have a normal life. He was burdened with a heavy task that wouldn't just stop after revealing his message. What kind of power did Mark possess that made the adults feel so in awe and impressed? Could Mark truly be the true messenger they had all been waiting for? Mark had always been an unusual kid. He hardly felt connected to his peers and was mostly alone. Through his dreams at night, it became clear to him that he was a special child. He never felt the need to play with other kids. Instead, he looked forward to sleeping because it was then that his adventures would start. He was able to access a world far beyond his own, a place where he was the master of his own destiny. He could do anything he wanted and travel anywhere he pleased. Mark's dreams were his portals to a world of endless possibilities. He found comfort in his dreams and was often able to craft stories and scenarios that were more exciting and thrilling than anything he could ever experience in the real world. Soon after it was Mark's birthday, he needed a computer to continue his pursuit and to communicate his message. He convinced his parents to buy him a high-end computer with a large memory, high-speed processor, and large monitor. His parents were a bit surprised at his dedication to the computer, but they could tell it was something he was passionate about. He knew he had created the perfect machine for his needs and was looking forward to years of use from it. Finally, the computer was gifted to him, and after he enthusiastically unpacked the computer and put it in his room, after the family and friends have all gone home, Joyce and her husband Oscar are ready for a good night's sleep. They urge Mark to go to bed as well, and he immediately starts brushing his teeth. He then asks if he can use his computer for a while before going to sleep. He was up to something. He started talking about his schoolwork and how he had some important research that he needed to complete. As a final resort, he reminded him that the day isn't over yet, and so technically it's still his birthday. How could his parents possibly say no to that? Joyce agrees. She emphasizes that it is an exception. From tomorrow, you can't use the computer after 7 p.m. Is that understood? Mark nods obediently. Days go by, everything seems fine, and Mark actually seems to stick to the computer times. Well, he did. But out of sight of Joyce and Oscar, more was developing than they had thought possible. Mark had been very meticulously covering his tracks. He had been careful to check the history on the computer to make sure his parents wouldn't be able to find out what he had been doing late at night. He had also changed his passwords frequently so that his parents wouldn't be able to get access to the computer. He even used incognito mode when he was browsing the web so that his parents wouldn't be able to track his web activity. Little did his parents know, it wasn't the computer that they had to watch out for. Rather, it was the dreams Mark had that now drove him to get behind his computer at night. One night, James began to notice. He came home a little later after drinking a few beers in the cafeteria with some rugby buddies. After returning home, he went straight to the bedroom, but when he looked to the right, he saw light coming from under Mark's door. James decided to check in on Mark for his own peace of mind. He knocked on the door and called out his son's name, but there was no response. And that was not all. He also heard little Mark sobbing and mumbling a few words. He opens the door a crack as quietly as he can, so as not to wake his wife. He expects Mark to have a nightmare and that he simply has to wake him up from it. Even stranger was that Mark wasn't even in bed. James saw Mark behind his computer. Mark had no idea that his dad had come in. James watched as tears rolled down Mark's cheeks, and what was even more disturbing, Mark was speaking some sort of unintelligible language. Mark was so scared that he thought about calling his wife, but he wasn't sure how she could help. He felt so alone and helpless in that moment. He was shaking and his heart was pounding. He felt like he was in a nightmare and he couldn't wake up. James could see the fear in Mark's eyes as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He wanted to reach out and comfort his son, but he was too afraid to move. He was afraid that if he did, Mark would disappear. Mark had tilted his head slightly back with his mouth slightly open as he tried to say something. Not knowing what to do, Oscar immediately leaves Mark's bedroom. He cannot understand it, and so he does not bother to explain it to himself at all. He feels guilty for not being able to provide for his son in a way that would have protected him from whatever is happening in his life. He goes straight to bed, but instead found himself tossing and turning. He still had plenty to think about, particularly how he was going to tell his wife about what he just witnessed. James sits at the breakfast table with Joyce and Mark the next morning. After breakfast, Joyce and Mark help clear the table and do the dishes while James reads the morning paper. They all sit together and chat about their plans for the day. Afterward, Joyce and Mark head off to school, and James heads off to work. The family breakfast routine is a wholesome affair that they all look forward to. Today, however, would be a little different. James keeps staring at Mark, who seems as unbothered as any other day. James offered him some more cereal. Mark politely declines, saying he's not hungry. He then asks him gently, "Hey buddy, did you sleep well? You look a little tired." Mark's answer would surprise him. "Do you really care, Dad? You never wanted to hear about Mars. If I seem tired, it has to do with Mars." And he stands up from the breakfast table and walks away. James can't believe his ears. Maybe it was time to seek help for this after all. James takes Joyce aside shortly after breakfast to tell her about what he had seen and heard that night. But he didn't have to count on much support. Joyce laughs about it and tells him that he should drink less at the rugby club from now on. James couldn't help but feel hurt and angry that Joyce doesn't take his concerns seriously. The next surprise was right around the corner, and this time it was Joyce who would have to deal with it. Mark repeatedly asked her for more paper because the papers in his printer had already run out. She suspects he's just drawing on it, but that wasn't the case. Joyce was trying to understand why Mark needed so much paper. She assumed he was doodling, which she was thankful for because it was a pleasant change from him usually being glued to his computer. Joyce was starting to become a bit confused about all the paper that Mark was asking for. She asked him what he was working on, but he just smiled and said he would tell her soon. Joyce buys the papers for Mark and calls him when she gets home. Joyce holds the papers for a while Mark already wants to walk away with them. She makes sure to tell him that it's not cheap, and Mark says he understands. Then Joyce asks him what he actually needs the paper for. "Come to my room, Mommy, and I'll let you read the message," Mark replies. Joyce agrees, still not fully understanding the seriousness of the situation, and tells him she'll come after she's done cleaning the house. However, this decision to delay the message was a crucial miss on her part. By not taking the time to read the message, Joyce failed to recognize the importance of the situation. But it was already too late for that because before she had time to go to Mark's room, two men were at the door. They came for Mark. It was Mark himself who opened the door. The men immediately asked him if he was Mark, and he nodded. He then told them about the message he received from Mars. To this day, the message is being investigated, and it seems more and more that little Mark knows more about Mars than any scientist. His parents, James and Joyce, could not fathom what these official-looking men could possibly need from their little boy, but one thing's for sure. They did not hesitate to believe him when he said he had some important message from Mars. There was a bright future ahead for Mark. Over time, and with the proper support, he was finally getting the recognition he deserved for his hard work and dedication to science. He felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that he had never felt before. His peers and mentors were now looking to him for guidance and advice. He was now being seen as a leader in the scientific community, and it was a great feeling. He was finally getting the respect he deserved, and it was a great feeling. There was a bright future ahead for Mark.